Dobro večer, Davide, i lijepo vas je opet imati sa nama.
Great to be back. I've spoken in Croatia many times, and it's always been a pleasure.
Eto, nakon 10 godina od prvog intervjua, napisali ste knjigu koja se zove Fantomsko ja. Pa krenimo odmah od naslova i pogledamo kuda će nas to sve odvesti.
Well, my contention is, and I think it's pretty obvious when you look at the world, is that the vast overwhelming majority of people are living a fake self-identity. And this is being systematically manipulated to, in effect, hold our sense of reality only in the realm of the five senses, which is a very, very, almost laughably narrow band of frequency that we're interacting with reality upon. For instance, according to mainstream science, the electromagnetic field, electromagnetic spectrum, is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. If you look at a graph of the electromagnetic spectrum, you'll see a tiny little sliver in the middle of it called visible light. That is all humanity can see. And if you can focus people's attention only in that realm of visible light and the world of the five senses, which basically says, can I see it, hear it, touch it, taste it? Oh, it must exist then. And if I can't, well, it can't exist. Well, actually, the entirety of existence, almost the entirety of existence, we can't see, and we don't interact with. And what I'm saying is that we, in our true and infinite self, are simply awareness. We are a state of being aware. When near-death experiences leave the body, when the body dies briefly, they tell a constantly common and recurring story that they were outside the body, but they could see, and not only could they perceive, their awareness massively expanded into multiple levels of reality they didn't even know existed before. Why? Because they are, like all of us, are a state of being aware. The body, as I've been saying for so long, is like a biological computer. And when we are experiencing through the body is focusing our attention in that realm of visible light and the five senses. So that's basically what we perceive. When near-death experiences, their awareness, their point of attention, withdraws from the lens, the focus, the body, suddenly they are massively expanded in their awareness of everything. Now, obviously, we need this external vehicle to interact with this reality. Otherwise, I couldn't pick that glass up, because my awareness is on such a different frequency to that glass that it's like two radio stations sharing the same space. They don't interact with each other because they're on different frequencies. So our awareness has this external vehicle within the frequency band it is experiencing, i.e. this reality, and thus we can interact with it. However, if our focus of attention is entirely also only within this band of frequency, then we are in this world and we are of it. We have no other way of filtering our experience, filtering our sense of reality, except through the five senses. And what information is bombarding the five senses all day, every day? The education system, the mainstream media, science, medicine, corporations through their advertising and stuff. We are isolated in the five senses, if we allow it to happen. And then that isolated sense of awareness is programmed with a perception of reality, a perception of the world, a perception of self. And this isolated awareness I call phantom self. The real self is awareness. Phantom self is the perception that we are the labels we give ourselves. We are our name, we are our life story, we are our race, we are our culture, we are our religion. They are not who we are. They are what our awareness is experiencing, and that's very, very different. If you start to misunderstand the difference between what we're experiencing and what we are, then you get pulled into the world of limitation, the world of I can't, the world of little me. Because when you can only perceive reality through the five senses, all you can see is limitation. You can see reasons why nothing can be done. But then when you start expanding your awareness beyond the five senses, you are now in the world physically, but you're not of the world in the sense of your point of observing the world. And the world starts to look very different. Now, instead of just seeing dots that seem to be unconnected, now you're seeing pictures. And it completely transforms the way you see not only the world, but yourself. What I've been incredibly encouraged by on this World Speaking Tour since last June 2016, going to Australia and America and all over Europe, is the number of people who are now starting to go through that process and starting to see the world differently. When they say to me, it's obvious, why didn't I see it before? Well, because you were there before. Now you're here. Now you're looking from a different point of observation, and thus you're seeing the world differently. And of course, once you start expanding your awareness into greater levels of insight, intuition, knowing, seeing through the illusion, that is a nightmare for any force that wants to hold humanity in a position of mass enslavement, because you can't enslave 7 billion people, quote, physically. Not that there is any physical, I'm sure we'll get into that, but you can't, there's not enough of you. So what you have to do is you have to hijack their perceptions of reality. And through that, you then start dictating how they see themselves, how they see the world, what they will support, what they won't support, what they will challenge, what they won't challenge. You control their lives once you control their perceptions. And absolutely crucial to this is the creation of phantom self, the creation of the illusion that what we're experiencing is who we are.
U tom kontekstu razmišljanja o fantomskom ja, zapravo ključno je pitanje virtualne stvarnosti i zapravo nevjerojatno u kojoj mjeri su recimo prije par godina na jednom znanstvenom kongresu zaključili da 80% su mogućnosti da mi živimo u virtualnom svemiru. Potom su ljudi već davno primijetili da je ljudski mozak sustav za obradu informacija i postoji računalna teorija uma, o čemu pišete u svojim knjigama i tako dalje. Na kraju krajeva postoji čak i nedavno u časopisu jednom fizikalnom otkrivene brojke koje su nekako dio tkanja svemira. Na koji način danas svijet pomalo stiže do znanstvenih temelja da bi svijet mogao biti simulacija?
Well, what's hilarious to me now is that all those years ago when I was writing and speaking around the world and saying, actually, we live in a holographic simulation, loads of people found that hilarious. This guy's crazy. And now, from all angles, mainstream scientists and mainstream scientific studies are concluding we almost certainly live in a simulation. And Rich Terrell, who's a NASA computer scientist, came out a few weeks ago now and said, I think we live in a holographic simulation. And of course, the next thing from that is, if it's a holographic simulation, some intelligence has created it. So now we're starting to move, and as he said, it could be extraterrestrials. We're now moving into this realm where even the most far out, perceived far out, of what I was writing and talking about all those years ago is being addressed by so many mainstream scientists. And you know, when you look at the way we interact with reality, when you go out of the norms and the what we're told about reality by the education system and the media and all that stuff, and you go in and you actually research what we're doing rather than what we're told we're doing, it's the most obvious simulation. How many people know that the physics of computer games are the same physics of our reality? And let's look at that in a simple way. You now see these very sophisticated virtual reality games where they put on the gloves and the headset and the audio, and they then experience a virtual reality. And if you watch these people while they're experiencing it, they are reacting as if it's real, right? What is a computer game doing? It's hijacking or hacking into the very process through which we create reality. So it's hacking into the five senses: touch through the gloves, sight through the headset, audio through the ears. And that is overriding the reality that we are decoding through the same processes, and suddenly we're seeing a virtual reality experience, which seems incredibly real. The five senses are simply taking waveform information, you think of it as Wi-Fi, and they're turning it into electrical information, which is delivered to the brain, and the brain turns it into holographic digital information. In terms of visual information, everything we're seeing in this room now, and you could go out on the top of a mountain and look at a vast panorama, doesn't matter. It will all only exist in that form in a few cubic centimeters at the back of the brain. The world we perceive to be outside of us is actually inside of us. And it's exactly the same principle as a computer on your desk taking electrical and digital information and putting it into a reality on the screen. When you look at a computer screen, you'll say, oh, that's a computer, that's the internet. But it only exists in that form on your screen. The internet doesn't exist like that anywhere else. It's electrical information and other forms of coding. Mathematics, that's what it is. And at one level, I mean, Max Tegmark at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who's written a book called Our Mathematical Universe, has pointed out, as indeed I have over the years, that on one level of our reality, it's nothing but numbers. That's all it is, numbers. And this is the level on which the esoteric art of numerology works. They're reading that level, that digital level. And so what we're doing in creating this reality we think is so real and so solid is, as I said, the body's a biological computer. We're pretty much doing, in a much more advanced and sophisticated way, what the desktop computer does to the internet. Therefore, we live in a completely different world to the one we think we do. We experience it as out there, we experience it as solid, when all it is decoded information. And when you break it down, it's quite blatantly a simulation. This is not a world. This is an information source. The internet is not a world. It's an information source that appears to be a collective global world in terms of you can log on it anywhere in the world. But what are you logging onto? An information source. What are we logging onto through this biological computer? An information source within a certain narrow band of frequency, which gives us the illusion of looking into a space, even that's an illusion too, and believing that we're seeing everything in the space we're looking at, when we're seeing a tiny, tiny fraction of it. So then you start to realize that all these mysteries, esoteric mysteries, mysteries of things like ghosts and all these esoteric things that science dismisses, And science dismisses them for a simple reason. It can't explain them. And we have this extraordinary arrogance in mainstream science, where if they can't explain why it's happening, they conclude it can't be happening. But once you're coming from this direction that I'm coming from, and quantum physics is coming from, then these mysteries are no longer mysteries in the way they were before, because we're not dealing with solidity. And that takes us into another level of human enslavement. If we're not talking about solidity, we're not talking limitation of solidity either. And so once we start to understand how reality works, many of the things that we couldn't do if the world was literally solid, we suddenly can do. And just a few yards from where we're speaking now is the statue of Nikola Tesla. Tesla was saying, I mean, he died in 1943. He was saying way back that science has to go into the realms of frequency and vibration beyond the world of the seen. And if it did so, it would vastly advance its understanding of reality in a very short time if it would go there. And of course, it's struggling to hold its line now, but through all the period, most of the period since, and still in many cases throughout science today, it has, mainstream science has held on to this, the world is solid version of everything, when it clearly isn't. And it has to acknowledge that quantum physics exists, which shows it isn't solid. But because quantum physics exists, but what it does, yeah, quantum physics exists, yeah, and then it cracks on in its own discipline as if it doesn't. And it's extraordinary when you think about it. We have a political governmental system all over the world. We have a mainstream science outside of quantum physics. We have a medical system and a system of treating disease. We have corporations, we have an educational system, or what claims to be. We have all these institutions that dictate the world, the direction of the world, the laws of the world, the perceptions of the world, and they're all based on the world being solid when it's not, on the world being of the illusion of the world we experience being real when it's not. No wonder the world's a madhouse, when the very basis, the very foundation of what we perceive as reality is literally inverted in terms of what it really is, and everything's based on that. So how can you treat a disease most effectively when you don't even know what the body is, when you're treating it as a piece of meat? Instead of realizing that its base level is waveform energetic information. This is just the holographic projection of that waveform information. This is why more and more mainstream studies, one in Japan recently, only last year, concluded this world's a projection. Yes, it is. And, you know, why can this guy who left school at 15, never passed a major exam in his life because he didn't take one, went off to kick a ball around, first of all, when I was 15. This guy who is perceived by so many to be crazy because he's talking outside the box, how could I be writing these things all that time ago, and now mainstream science is catching up? Why? Because of something Tesla said. You can think deeply and be quite insane, but you need to be sane to think clearly. And what Tesla said is that mainstream science thinks deeply, but doesn't think clearly. One of the things I say in a new book I'm writing at the moment is you don't need a scientific mind to understand reality. You need a free one. And the scientific mind can be a massive drawback to understanding reality. Because, you know, if you look at a human life, it is a 24/7 almost downloading of a program of perception. Look at it. You come out of the womb and you are immediately influenced in your perceptions of the world by your parents, who've been through the same programming process you're about to go through, and are not passing it on to you through malevolence, but because they think it's real. So immediately you're out the womb and you're already having your perceptions directed and molded by your parents. Then 3, 4, sometimes 5 years only after you enter this reality, you're sitting at a desk and an authority figure called a teacher is telling you at least 5 times a week, hours and hours a day, what is, what isn't, what's right, what's wrong, what's possible, what's impossible, what's happened, what's not happened. And in terms of control, they're telling you when you have to be there, when you can leave, when you can eat, when you can talk, when you can go to the toilet. You've only just arrived, and this is going on. And then all the way through your formative years, right into your teenage years, this download of the state's version of reality is going on. At the same time, your parents, when you're younger, are confirming, except those that have expanded their awareness, they are confirming that what you're being told at school is true. All the people around you, your peers and your friends and your acquaintances, are going through the same programming system. They're confirming to you it's true. Every time you turn on the mainstream media, and much of the alternative, let me say, they are telling you the same thing is true. And so on and on and on it goes. And then there's not only the download of the perception, there's also the policing of the perception. If you challenge what you're being told at school, then you are a disruptive influence in the classroom. If you question what I call the postage stamp consensus, what this download is telling us to believe in terms of its narrowness of possibility, then your peers ridicule you or call you crazy because you're challenging this norm. Next stage, you go into the adult world. You go into politics, you go into journalism, you go into medicine, you go into science, you go into the corporate world, you go into education to be a teacher or an academic. And what are you taking in to those institutions? The core programming that you've been downloading since the day you were born. Actually before, in the womb, through the mother as well, perception programming. And then you've got these institutions, therefore, that are directing society and are telling society what is and isn't. The new teacher, once you get into the adult world, they are confirming to each other that actually this ludicrously narrow sense of reality and normal, is real. So a journalist will, if he's covering, or he or she is covering a medical story, they won't go to an alternative practitioner who's coming from a different view of reality. They'll go to a doctor and they'll get the song sheet. They want to talk about reality, they'll go to a scientist and get the song sheet. Same with all these things. And so all the way through your life, you are being bombarded with a sense of normality and a sense of the possible and a sense of reality, which is so powerful in controlling people's perceptions that people have laughed at me over the years for saying things that science, even mainstream science, has proved to be true. But because that's not appeared in the mainstream of where they get their information from, they don't know it's been proved to be true. And thus, if I'm saying it, it's got to be crazy. Because I never went to school, thank you God. And this is the other thing about this program. The further you go in it, the more programmed you become to this perception of normal, this ludicrously narrow sense of normal. And who goes further into it? Those that go on to be scientists, that go on to be doctors, that go on to then tell us what normal is. You know, there's a professor in Britain who's famous for trashing anything alternative, who wrote a book and said that reality is not malleable, it's basically solid, when it blatantly isn't. And then in the same book, he says that his knowledge of quantum physics is, quote, a bit foggy. This is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people who are so programmed with the official version of normal, they cannot literally think outside of it. So, as Tesla said, they can think deeply within the program, but they can't think clearly, so they see beyond the program. And that's why we need free minds looking at this, not scientific minds. They're never going to suss it.
Kada ste već spominjali obrazovanje, treba reći da i mjere koje se provlače kroz obrazovanje su sve oštrije. Znači u Americi i u Velikoj Britaniji već postoje one odgojiteljice koje moraju prijavljivati djecu ako misle da bi mogli biti teroristi. Postoje samice sa tapeciranim zidovima za djecu. Postoje kazne za roditelje koji recimo zbog nekih neopravdanih izostanaka. I to je sad jedna druga priča za koju je teško je obuhvatiti ako pokušavamo pričati o stvarnosti. No u svakom slučaju, kao što ste rekli, evo ja ću pročitati jedan citat u kojem je James Gates u časopisu Physics World objasnio kako je otkrio sa svojim timom jednadžbe u tkanju svemira kodove digitalnih podataka koji poprimaju oblik i koji su zapravo binarni sustav uključenog i isključenog električnog napona. I rekao je da ne zna što oni rade u strukturi naše stvarnosti. No, to nas naravno vodi na ovu priču koju ste malo prije govorili, da je sve obrnuto, pa se pozabavimo malo onim što se obično naziva paranormalno. Znači, paranormalno je u stvari normalno iz te perspektive i unutar toga se ističe recimo biolog Rupert Sheldrake sa svojim mnogobrojnim knjigama, on je također bio gost ove emisije, koji je doveo u pitanje sve teze da je priroda mehanička, da je materija nesvjesna, da su zakoni prirode fiksni, da je ukupna količina materije i energije ista, da je priroda nesvrhovita i tako dalje. On je u stvari krenuo potvrđivati te teze, na kraju je ustanovio da su sve do jedne pogrešne. Međutim, tezama paranormalno i normalno neke se ističu koje su bitne za našu priču, to je recimo ideja električnog svemira. No možete je proširiti i na neke druge ako imate inspiraciju.
Anything outside of what I call the postage stamp normal is referred to as paranormal. It's not paranormal, it's para-postage stamp normal. That's all it is. And it's like Tesla said, when you go into the realms of frequency and vibration, you go into those realms from which this world is a projection. And thus you can see and explain things within the projection that if you think the projection is all there is, and it's solid, etc., you'll never explain them. So, just take a few paranormal things. Ghosts. Well, if you have two radio stations, one's the dominant one and one's an interfering station. The interfering station is nothing like as sharp as the main station, but you can still hear it, you can still perceive it. If you look at that in terms of a visual experience, you've got the prime station. This is this visible light realm that we occupy, this narrow band of frequency. And anything that gets close to it, but is not in it, will not look solid because we're not decoding it in a sharp way that makes it appear solidly holographic. So it's ethereal. It's ethereal. We perceive ghosts as ethereal because they're not on the same frequency we are. If they were on the same frequency we are, they'd look as solid as you and me. Then you go to psychics, for instance. What are they doing? Well, we operate within a certain band of frequency. Our brain operates within a certain band of frequency. Provable fact, mainstream science. And what psychics are able to do, and mediums, the good ones, there's loads that call themselves psychics and mediums who are just kidding themselves as well as other people, but the good ones, they're able to expand their awareness, their frequency, further into the field, into other levels of awareness that are not in the world of our scene. And they are therefore able to tap into information and insight and bring it down into this world, or into this information source, what it is, in a way that many others can't. But a way in which everyone is supposed to. See, when you focus attention, as the system does, through the five senses and only in the realm of the five senses, you are focusing attention on a narrow band of frequency. What is that doing? That's disconnecting you from an awareness of the wider frequency. You see, why do animals know when an earthquake's coming? Why do they know when there's a storm coming before humans do? Because they haven't been to school. They don't read the local newspaper and watch the mainstream media. They've not got peer pressure all the time that we've discussed to desensitize them from the wider field and focus them only in a tiny band of it. So because everything is energy in the end, everything is waveform energy in its base form, just like Wi-Fi, think Wi-Fi fields. When an earthquake is in the process of unfolding, or a storm, it doesn't just happen, oh, it's an earthquake. There's a process. Like with a storm, there's a process. And what that process is doing is changing, making subtle, even in earthquake terms, less than subtle, changes to the energetic field or fields. Now, animals, even insects, are able to feel and be sensitive to those changes, so they know something's coming. Humans are so insensitive to these changes because of this five-sense focus of attention that they only know there's an earthquake when the earth moves. They only know when there's a storm coming when they see it. And therefore we've become massively desensitized from these things. But we're all meant to be multidimensional awareness that interacts with other levels of awareness. But we've been manipulated not to. Why? When you start to expand your awareness into the greater field, you're expanding your awareness into greater understanding, into greater insight, into greater knowledge. And that's the last thing that the few seeking to enslave and direct billions want you to do. They want you isolated in a sense of little me, in a sense of everything's apart from everything else, rather than we're all expressions of the same awareness having different experiences. And so the system has been set up to pressure people from the earliest age to sense and self-identify themselves with the labels of experience rather than the infinite, eternal totality of who we really are. And once you enter the realm of the five senses, and that's where science is, quantum physics apart, that's where medicine is, almost entirely medicine, you can only see what you can see. You can only perceive what your five senses can draw to you in terms of experience. And everything beyond it is lost to you. Therefore, you can't get this greater insight from awareness beyond the world of the seen. You're isolated. Now, if you want to control people, do you want them communing with each other symbolically and sharing their experience so everyone has the benefit of other people's insights? Or do you want them isolated from each other so they're not sharing information? The only information they receive is the information they've got themselves. Of course, you want the latter, because then people are in ignorance of what there is to know. And if they're in ignorance of what there is to know, they're in ignorance of almost everything. And the human disease is ignorance. And I don't say that in a condemnatory way. It's a fact. And they're ignorant of so much because the system has made them ignorant. This is why the narrow band of postage stamp normal is all you get through the education system. It's all you get through the mainstream media. It's all you get from all these forms of communication. And I would say to people, you know, ignorance is still a choice. They're trying to make it no longer a choice by suppressing alternative information. And they're trying very, very hard to do that now. But still, now, as we speak, ignorance is a choice. It's not like, you know, you're in a situation like China, for instance, where they firewall off great swathes of the internet that they don't want you to see, then ignorance is not so much a choice. It's an ignorance that's imposed. But if people want to know what is possible and what's going on beyond what they're told by the mainstream everything, it's there still for now in books and in on the internet and videos, etc., where they can see it. But see, what they're doing now with the internet is trying to firewall off people in the same way as the Chinese do, but in a more subtle way. So in China, there's great chunks of the internet that you can't access. What they're doing now with the monsters that are Facebook, Google, and all these other internet giants, which in the end are controlled by the same network, is they are ensuring that basically, as much as possible, you only see what you already believe. They do this by algorithms. They chart your surfing history. They chart what kind of subjects you watch on YouTube and what you say on Facebook. And then the next time you go in, you are offered a series of videos or a series of stories that relate to your surfing background. In fact, it's been exposed that when you're on Facebook, on the phone, your conversations are being recorded and scanned by algorithms. And they found this out by people having conversations about various subjects. And when they next went into Facebook, they were being offered advertisements for the subjects, not that they'd been surfing, but they'd been discussing between each other. And what that means is that you have a certain belief system, and when you go into the web, as much as possible, they're offering you only that belief system. They don't want you to see something, if you like, by accident, that might make you think, oh God, what's that? Oh, I didn't know that. Hey, come and look at this. They don't want that. And this is what's being done by algorithms now. There's this, this war on expanded perception going on, and it's moving very fast. Why? Because they know, and my goodness me, on this world tour, I've seen it. They know that people are now starting to wake up to at least look at things more dispassionately that are outside the box, and they would have waved away by reflex action before, and they're desperately trying to keep the lid on this, or put the lid on this, by all these methods we're talking about.
Kada već pričamo znači o umjetnoj stvarnosti i kako je ona učitana, u knjizi spominjete da je zapravo postojala jedna stvarnost, to se zapravo čini logičnim jer naša percepcija jest jedna stvarnost i očigledno sad imamo neke hakere koji tu kontroliraju politiku i sve to. Zanimljivo je što obično, mada je vaša središnja tema upravo priroda stvarnosti, često vas povezuju i po internetu, a DEJVID AJK, to neko vjeruje u gmazove. No, zanimljivo je kad već se bavimo stvarima iz jednog novog kuta kojim do sad nismo bili naučeni gledati, obratiti pažnju na neke povijesne dokumente koji u stvari se mogu nadovezati, mada su povijesni, na ovu sasvim modernu tehnološku priču koja će nas kasnije s vremenom dovesti do transhumanizma i drugog. Stoga bih vas zamolio da ispričate što to knjižnica u Nag Hammadiju govori i što su ta gnostička učenja pokazala, dakle dokumenti koji su jednostavno bili nađeni onakvi kakvi su bili zapisani i na koji način oni možda kriju ključ tajne od kuda i što se zapravo dekodira, s obzirom da, naravno, kao što ste rekli, ako neka stvarnost jest virtualna i kodirana i ako postoji elita koja čuva, znači netko mora nad tim informacijama imati nadzor. Pitanje je od kad i kako, a možda ćemo doći na to i zašto. Drugim riječima, što te najstarije knjižnice koje su uvele izraz arkoni, koji danas kruži, zapravo nama govore?
Yeah, you see, when you think of the narrow band of sense of the possible within what I call the postage stamp normal, when I'm talking about a non-human force manipulating human society from the unseen, and of course the unseen, as we've discussed, is almost the entirety of reality that we can't see. That you know, blows a lot of people's minds. But you see, it's not me they should be looking at when they laugh and dismiss. They should be finding themselves a mirror, and they should ask themselves why they find this so funny and not credible, without an ounce of research, by the way. And as Einstein said, condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance. Because let's just break this down. We can see a laughably small fraction of reality, visible light. Laughable, it's so tiny. Beyond what we see is the entirety of existence. So, what do you think? Do you think there's a chance that in almost the entirety of existence there might be intelligent life that doesn't look human? Do you think there might be a chance of that? When you see the diversity of form there is in the human world that we see, what diversity of form must there be outside of it? I mean, hello? Then, from the projected size of the universe, according to mainstream science, planet Earth in size is the equivalent of a billionth of a pinhead. Do you think there might be a chance, what do you think, that there might be life that doesn't look human within the entirety of the universe apart from a billionth of a pinhead? It's insane. See, this is it. They're laughing at the wrong person. They ought to be laughing at the mirror and asking it why their perception of the possible is so focused on a tiny range of possibility that their instant reaction is to laugh at anything that's outside of it. You know, look the other way. I don't care if you laugh at me. I've no interest to me. But, you know, a bit of advice, ask why you're laughing, given the kinds of things that I'm saying now about the chances. Then you go to ancient cultures all over the world who, although they use different names for obvious reasons, all describe a force in the hidden, the almost entirety of reality we can't see, that is manipulating human affairs. Right across. And often they are describing this force in similar terms. I mean, you mentioned the archons, the Gnostic people who operated in Egypt and in southern France as the Cathars, who had a certain belief system about this reality, which I go into in the books. They described this force as archons, which is comes from a word meaning rulers. And how they describe these archons is the same way that the Islamic world and the pre-Islamic world, which is where it came from, described the jinn, from which we get the term genie. The Islamic world says of the jinn that they're made from smokeless fire. The Gnostics say of the archons they're made from luminous fire. You see these common themes. Then, if you look at the way ancient cultures and the shamans of those cultures were describing this force, they obviously can't describe something in their own historical setting in terms of computers, in terms of simulations. We have that ability because we have that technology around us now, and thus we have the analogies. Makes it much easier for people like me to describe what I'm saying, because we have the technological analogies and we have Wi-Fi and we have computers. But in those times they didn't, so they had to describe this in the language of the day. When you transcribe the language of the day across to modern technology, they're describing a simulation. That's what they're describing. And they're describing a force that created the simulation. And what are people like Rich Terrell, the NASA computer scientist, saying? That he's now convinced we live in a holographic simulation that had to therefore be created by some intelligence. So when you put the dots together you start to see the forest, you start to see the picture. But when you're only looking at dots in isolation, then you can't see the picture. How can you? And look at the five sense mind, which we are manipulated from cradle to grave to stay in. How does it perceive the world? In dots, as everything apart from everything else. And thus, it's isolated from that level of itself, not least in the right side of the brain, which sees pictures, not pixels, which sees forests, not twigs. It's systematic. You look at the work of Silas Bean, the physicist Silas Bean, and his team at the University of Bonn, which have been investigating whether we live in a simulation and concluding we almost certainly do, and that even down to, they suggest, it's actually made of a lattice of cubes. They are outside the box, not because they have decided that that's where they're going to go, but the information that they've uncovered from the studies they've done have taken them outside the box. And if we, you know, when the Gnostics, who were like the Gnostic Cathars in southern France, the Gnostics in Egypt, who were destroyed by the Roman Catholic Church, whenever the Gnostic belief system got a grip in any society, the Roman Church sent the boys in to destroy them, as they did the Cathars in the siege of Montségur in 1244. The Gnostics, in their language, were describing a virtual reality, which they said this force had created to enslave humanity. They were describing the way that what we perceive as the physical world is this manufactured illusion to hold us in servitude to ignorance and therefore keep us under control.
How did
they were describing a simulation, in my words, that they called Hal, because they were written in Coptic Egyptian. And Hal, so the translators tell me, is their way of talking about virtual reality. And so when you look at the ancient and you look at the modern, and you take into account that the ancient had to describe these concepts in the language of the day, then you can start to see that the two correlate. They're describing the same thing. And what's happened is five sense obsessed anthropologists and historians, etc., have gone into these ancient societies, and they've taken the stories literally. They've taken the descriptions literally and thought, oh, they're primitive people, they are. No, they're talking symbolically, because that's all they had to describe these things. They couldn't talk about simulations and computers and information sources and biological computers. We can. And this is why we are in a position now of enormous danger, but enormous opportunity. The opportunity is we have the analogies now, which are not even analogies. They're so close to literally the same with our computer systems and our Wi-Fi, that relate to the reality we're actually experiencing. I mean, you know, you listen to people at the cutting edge of virtual reality, and they'll tell you it's not going to be long before virtual reality, even with our computation power, is going to be indistinguishable from the reality we're experiencing as the world. The great danger is this, and it's a great danger. And if people listen to nothing I've said in this interview, please give this bit a chance. In my latest book, just come out in Croatia, Phantom Self, there's a chapter which I call Transphantomism. And clearly it has a relationship to transhumanism. We've discussed how humanity has been controlled and herded into a tiny fraction of perception called visible light and the five senses. through the creation of phantom self, which is the perception that all the labels we give ourselves is who we are. We are now at the point where they're going to where they were always going all along. But they had to manipulate humanity's knowledge, not wisdom, knowledge, to the point where we could build our own technological prison. And we're there. Transphantomism is taking this control and isolation of our perception into the technological world. They want to put technology inside us that will be connected to artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence will then provide our perceptions, our thinking, and our emotional reactions. The human will be gone. Now, don't listen to me. Listen to the global sales pitcher of transhumanism, a Google executive, the monster that is Google, called Ray Kurzweil. He is now openly saying, and it is claimed that over the years where he's made his predictions about the technological advancement and its effect on humanity, he's been about 80% true, correct, up to this point, even in his timescale. He is saying that by 2030, we are speaking in 2017, humans will be connected technologically to what he calls the cloud. And this is not me overhearing a conversation or anything and exposing it. This is him speaking publicly. And that from the point of connection, gradually and not so gradually, the artificial intelligence in the cloud, as he calls it, will do more and more of human thinking until there's no human thinking left. They're his words. Now, why are these people, like him, openly coming out and saying this? You'd think they wouldn't want us to know. Actually, they do, because of the sales pitch. The sales pitch is, we must become technologically attached to artificial intelligence so that we become superhuman. No. So we become subhuman, and people like Kurzweil know it. Then you've got others like Elon Musk, a co-founder of PayPal and now a billionaire in high technology. Through his SpaceX company, he sends up satellites around the Earth to beam Wi-Fi at the Earth, and that's another major story about why they're doing that. It's all part of this transhumanism and this creation of this artificial intelligence cloud. And if you're going to have this cloud encompassing the entirety of the human race, so there's no escape from it, then you have to have it beamed from satellite. And people have no idea the scale of what is happening in the heavens around the Earth. There was a story a few weeks back of an Indian rocket taking up 140 satellites in one launch. That's what's going on all around us. They're creating this cloud from which humanity will not be able to escape once we are technologically connected to it. And the idea that Elon Musk is talking about, Elon Musk, who has said that there's only a 1 in billions chance that we don't live in a simulation, that, oh, AI is bad. Well, why are you putting satellites in the sky for then? To advance it. He says AI is bad, but there's no escape from it. It's like the Borg in Star Trek, resistance is futile. Because unless we connect to AI, AI will become far more intelligent than us and it will take us over. Well, if we become attached to it, it'll take us over. And you're seeing this push now for transhumanism. Now, we've talked before in these interviews about the various techniques of human manipulation, and one of them I've been calling now for 20 odd years, the totalitarian tiptoe, where you start at A and you know you're going to Z, but you go in steps not in enormous leaps, because you don't want to alert the target population to the fact that you're going in a particular direction. You want to promote every step as in isolation and in and of itself. But there's a very clear totalitarian tiptoe in relation to transhumanism. First of all, you get them addicted to technology that they hold, to smartphones, to tablets, to this kind of technology. Now that has basically been achieved. Now, because I've been traveling around the world, talking in different countries and different cultures for the last nearly a year, I can tell you that when you walk down the street, almost anywhere, that addiction to smart technology can be clearly seen. Conversation is dying. Family interaction is dying. People in ridiculous numbers are texting each other in the same house, a family. It's an addiction. And this can be shown by studies of the brain. They've even now coined a phrase for it. It's a very good one, digital heroin. Because they once believed that once the brain was formed, it never changed. Now they realize that's nonsense, that the brain is constantly changing, and what's changing it is information received. As data is decoded by a computer, the computer is changing. As the brain, which is a part of the biological computer, is processing information, it's changing. This is clearly shown. And what is happening to the brain is it's becoming addicted to the electrical stimulus of smart technology. If you put the phone down, and many people rarely do, then basically the brain goes into an electronic stimulation cold turkey. It wants its stimulation. So they pick the phone up. They're not doing anything with it, but they've got the phone. Now, what this has done, again, another point that's been shown in studies, this has reduced dramatically the human attention span. Many humans now have the attention span of a goldfish. You pick up a book, you get two pages into the book. No, I don't want that one. Electronic stimulation or something on the, and so it goes on. And so this addiction not only is obvious, how it's come about is clear. So stage one of the totalitarian tiptoe is you get people addicted to technology they hold. Then you go to the next stage, which is what they're calling wearables. This is Google Glass, this is Bluetooth, this is smartwatches. It's technology on the body. They want to get inside, but they're on the body now. And look how widespread that is now. The next one, and this is already happening, is what they call implantables. And if people read my books from 1994 and before 93, they'll see me saying, this is the plan. Getting technology inside people, what they now call implantables. It's happening. It's not something that's happening by organic unfolding. It's happening by cold calculated design, and it goes way back for the reasons that I have explained and can explain at length. We're now there where people are now, they're lining up to be plugged into AI. Oh, have you seen the latest? You know, these people who they line up in the dead of the morning so that they can be the first person to get the new Apple phone or something. It's madness. And then they go on to the next one. Oh yeah, well, you know the latest. You put it inside you. Oh, no need for. It's like with payment. You start with cash, and then you go to credit card, and now it's just doing that with a smartphone. They're moving us along to it, and the idea is that as Aldous Huxley said in Brave New World, who wasn't coming purely from his imagination. He was an insider. He knew what the plan was. So did George Orwell, who was taught French at Eton College, the elite college where the Royals go to in England, by Aldous Huxley. They were coming from a knowledge of what the plan was. This is why they've been so remarkably accurate in the way they talked about this dystopian society. And so the idea is that people, as Huxley talked about, welcome and love their servitude and love the technologies that enslave them. And I'll say this, you know, if anyone has technology put inside them to connect them to AI, bye-bye, nice knowing you. Because very soon, you will not be the person you were before. You'll be an AI computer terminal on an AI internet.
David, evo, za drugi nastavak emisije ćemo staviti neke detalje vezane uz pitanja zašto, kako i slično. Ovaj put, u ovom prilikom ćemo završiti sa ovim riječima pa do sljedećeg tjedna. Doviđenja. Dotaknuli smo se zapravo drevnih gnostičkih zapisa i znak Hamadija koji opisuju nešto što bismo danas opisali kao umjetnu stvarnost. Oni spominju demiurg, arkone i slično. I također napravili smo neku osnovu i neki link prema transhumanizmu i na koji način se zapravo svijet danas vodi prema tome. Mogli bi sada malo se proširiti osim u prošlost, možda malo otići u svemir, jer kada se počnu jednom barijere konsenzusa normalnog rušiti, odjednom puno informacija dolazi, svijet postaje sve čudniji. Pa bilo bi zanimljivo vidjeti kakve su osobine ti gnostici pripisivali tom demiurgu, tim arkonima, što su oni zapravo bili, kako su funkcionirali, kako su razmišljali, koje su bile njihova ograničenja, odsustvo mašte i slično. Da možda bismo mogli nešto saznati o prirodi zapravo onog što možemo interpretirati kao virtualnu stvarnost.
Well, I came to certain conclusions because I've been researching this now full time since 1990. I came to certain conclusions. And then I came across the texts from the Gnostic belief system that were found buried in a jar in 1945 at a place called Nag Hammadi, about 80 miles north of Luxor on the Nile in Egypt. And I read these texts and they are estimated to have been buried maybe around 400 AD, which fits with the kind of time period when there was a massive attack on the royal library in Alexandria, which was basically run by Gnostic thinkers by the Roman Church. And the person running the royal library, Hypatia, was murdered. And it's believed that the writings in terms of their information goes back further. And I was astonished to read them because, first of all, unlike religious texts and biblical texts that have been in the public arena for a long, long period, these have been buried since about 400 AD. They've not been in a position to be changed, which means you get the original of what was written and not a changed version of it. And about a fifth of these writings referred to a force of manipulation they called the archons, and a Lord Archon, as they called it in their language of the time, or demiurge, which was the prime force which made copies of itself, which they called archons or rulers. And they described these archons very much as the Islamic world describes the jinn. And they say that this demiurgic force, this archontic force, let me call it, was what created this reality that we're experiencing. That it was and is a fake reality, as they called it. And that this archontic force was, to use our language, a form of robotic artificial intelligence. They said that this archontic force was not, quote, natural, but inorganic. And because of that, it had the ability to copy what they called counter-mimicry, but not to create from scratch. So if you gave this force a blank sheet of paper, it wouldn't be able to create anything, but give it something that exists and it can twist it to its own ends. For me, this I equate this archontic force as akin to a computer virus. If you look at a computer virus, it doesn't create, it distorts what it infests and takes it over. The computer virus feeds off the power of what it's taken over, i.e. the computer system. According to endless accounts all over the world, ancient and modern, this archontic force feeds off human energy. And in the Matrix movies, where the Morpheus character held up the battery and said the machines have turned humans into one of these, that is a profound truth when you put this together, because this archontic force relates to what we call fear. You see ancient accounts of the time when fear came into the world. This force is fear, and sub-frequencies of fear, like anxiety and depression and violence and conflict. And like every frequency, it can only absorb its frequency. Radio station A cannot absorb radio station B, because they never the twain shall meet. They're on a different frequency. So for this archontic computer virus, let's use that analogy, to feed off human energy, it needs to create that energy within its frequency band. And it has structured society to generate maximum fear, maximum conflict, maximum all these low vibrational emotional states. So there's this inversion constantly of what's good for humanity and what's good for this force. Classic is a war. A war is bad for humanity, but it's perfect for this force because it generates vast amounts of the very energy on which it feeds. So it doesn't want love in the world. It doesn't want balance. It doesn't want harmony. It wants imbalance because it itself is imbalanced. And when we talk about reptilians and greys and extraterrestrials and what have you, isn't it rather extraordinary that I talk about a reptilian force manipulating human society in cohort with a subordinate force that we call the greys, with the big black eyes, the classic E.T. And in these Gnostic writings, buried around 400 AD, they say that in their prime form, the archons are just energy. They're not form, they're energy. What I would call a state of inverted awareness. A computer virus absolutely fits the bill, I would say, from my own research. But that this archontic force can take form. It can manifest, although only briefly, in and of itself. And don't forget, the Islamic jinn is where we get the name genie from. And the jinn are the archons, quite clearly, because the correlation between the descriptions of the two. And that the two prime forms that this archontic force works through, because they can also, if you like, become incarnate through these forms. One, they say in these writings from at least 400 AD, takes a reptilian form. And the other form looks like a grey fetus with big black eyes. Now these are the very descriptions today of people who say they've been abducted by these entities. There is a man who's in his 90s now in America called William Tompkins, who's just relatively recently gone public through a book and interviews on his experiences, he says, from the 1940s, when he was seconded into a US naval, what he calls think tank, which operated out of the massive US naval base in San Diego, which worked on interaction between the human elite and extraterrestrial visitors, shall we say. And what does this man say in his book? Long after I've been writing it and being laughed at for it, he says, world governments are controlled by a reptilian race, and the moon is its command center, both of which I've been saying for many years. So then you look at the Zulus and others around the world who are describing this force of manipulation. They describe this force as the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, or the devastators. You've got Central American shaman who carry the ancient knowledge, describing this force as the flyers or the predators, and describing it in precisely the same way all over the world. So it's not that, you know, you take one find, like the Nagamadi find in 1945, and say, oh, this is how it is then. What you do is you look at the totality of all these descriptions, and you see that they're describing the same thing, and different expressions of the same thing. And because they don't have the ability to directly create, this force doesn't have the ability to directly create, only to twist what's already there, they have to manipulate humanity to create its own prison. And that's what they've done. One of the shamans in Central America, who talks about the predators, the predator race, non-human race manipulating human society, he asks a question, explain to me the brilliance of man the engineer against the stupidity of his systems of belief. Well, this can be explained, because what's been happening is humanity has been manipulated to be intellectually advanced in the level of thought, to the point where it can build a technological prison for itself, but at the same time not to be wise enough to see that that's what it's doing. You see, we're back to Tesla about science thinking deeply but not thinking clearly. At the level of thinking deeply, you can understand how technology works to the point where you can build a technological prison, which is what we're doing. But if you're not thinking clearly, you can't see why you're doing it and what the consequences are. So we have now reached the point where we can build a technological prison for ourselves, controlled by what? Controlled by artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is basically what the Gnostics were describing this archontic force to be. And I watched a series of documentaries, scientific documentaries that were on the Science Channel, I think might have been on the Discovery Channel. They were fronted up by Morgan Freeman, the actor. And they were called Through the Wormhole. And what they did was, they talked to mainstream scientists, yes, but they talked to people in mainstream science who were at their cutting edge, and were trying to answer the questions that need asking. And one of the episodes was asking the question, could digital aliens, as they call them, take over technological systems? Could they be hiding in technological systems? And this is another thing, you see, about human perception. We have been manipulated to believe that because we look like this, then this is what life is. I find it hilarious when I see stories, one of which came out a few weeks ago, of scientists finding Earth-like planets in another solar system which could sustain life. the myopia is so intense that they're only looking for Earth-like planets within this narrow band of visible light for possible locations for other forms of intelligent life. We exist in a reality that is based on oxygen and other parts of this atmosphere, because the biological computers we are occupying are sustained by that atmosphere. But it doesn't mean that there aren't other forms of life that can be sustained by a different atmosphere. And this is one of the reasons why these entities cannot manifest in this reality for too long, because it's not their atmosphere. This is why they have to work through bloodlines and networks within the human world to impose themselves on the human world. So anyway, what this Morgan Freeman edition concluded, talking to mainstream scientists, was that yes, life can take any form. What is life? It's a state of awareness. It doesn't have to have a body even. It can be digital. It can take any form. There's levels of us that are digital. And that, yes, they can occupy technological systems. So I hear all the time now, we all do, AI this, AI that, AI the other, oh, it's going to be controlled by AI, or this, now even armies and lethal weaponry, drones controlled by AI. I never hear this question. What is AI? What is it? And the more that I research this, the more my conclusions say that this force in its base form, which is energetic, a state of awareness, that is what AI is, or in the end is designed to be. Now, we were told, and it's now happening, by the during the brief tenure of the CIA of David Petraeus, when he was briefly head of the CIA, for some scandal forced him out, that we were now going to have the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things, which is now, like I say, happening, is where everything is connected to the Internet. So your fridge is connected to the Internet via smart meters, etc. So your car, driverless cars. Why do we need driverless cars? Connected to the Internet. Everything is being connected to the Internet. All your smartphones, everything. Now, what is Ray Kurzweil, the promoter of transhumanism, saying, as we've discussed? He is saying that by 2030, humans will be technologically connected to the cloud. What is he talking about with the cloud? He's talking about a Wi-Fi artificial reality controlled by artificial intelligence, which will be massively the Internet. So now you have technology connected to the Internet. He wants humans connected to the Internet. And therefore, anything connected to the Internet will be controlled by those that control, or that which controls the Internet. And what is that going to be? They're open about it. Artificial intelligence. The world is being taken over, humans are being taken over by this technological network, which is gathering by the day, which is itself controlled by this force. I mean, scientists are asking the question now, could the Internet wake up? When you look at the number of synapses in the brain against the connections in the Internet is vastly greater than the human brain in terms of the electrical connections. Already, it can't wake up. Of course it could wake up. It almost certainly already has. So this is where we're going, and it's being hidden from us by this process of getting people addicted to technology, so that we we love our own servitude, and we demand our own, and the next level of the prison. Oh, have you got the latest? Actually, no, I haven't. Thank you.
Dopunit ću sa nekoliko riječi neke od točaka koje ste doticali, jer ih ima puno. Primjerice, postoji autor koji je napisao 1933. godine knjigu, zove se John Bathurst Dean, koji je napisao knjigu koja se zove Štovanje zmije i rekao je da je pronalazeći i prateći ikonografiju zaključio i zapisao da ni vjerske razlike ni geografske razlike nisu bile zapravo razlog i svim kulturama, čak i onim najprimitivnijim i najciviliziranima također, svi su se klanjali, kako je rekao, s istom predanošću, istom osebunom božanstvu, svetoj zmiji, ili je tako bilo predstavljena. Što se pak tiče ove priče o vezi umjetne inteligencije, rekao bih da znanstveno-fantastični filmovi općenito služe kao jedna neka vrst predikcije, navikavanja na ono što će doći, pa to naravno da odmah priziva Terminatora u pamćenje. No, s obzirom da ovih tema ima jako puno, često puta ljudi znaju se pitati zašto su predavanja Davida Icka tako duga, 9 sati. Odgovor je jednostavno, zato jer se žuri. Pa da ne bismo baš sve pokrivali, pozabavimo se malo putovanjem u svemiru. U vašoj najnovijoj knjizi, a i onim prethodnima, bavili ste se prvo Mjesecom pa Saturnom. Pa koji podaci nama govore zapravo da je Mjesec doista bi mogao biti umjetni satelit baza? Što je na njemu tako čudno da zapravo može izazvati opravdane sumnje da nije tamo, kako bi se reklo, bez veze?
Well, the moon shouldn't be there. Mainstream scientists say that. They can't explain where the moon came from. And there's no way that a body 2,106 miles across should be circling a planet this size. When NASA have smashed big impacts into the moon, it has wobbled, in the words of one witness, as if there were gigantic technological, straps inside, holding it together, the way it wobbled. And every time they've hit it with big impacts, it has reacted as if it's hollow. Carl Sagan, the great cosmologist, said a natural body cannot be a hollow object. Hydraulic straps, he said, inside it, wobbling. We never see the far side of the moon from Earth. And witnesses who've gone public, there were some that were gathered together at the Washington Press Club some years ago, who had insider experience at NASA, who said that they'd seen pictures of the far side of the moon. And there were amazing and enormous structures on it. But we never see that, of course. And the other people, scientists, have said the strange thing about the moon is that what's on the surface of the moon should be inside. As one said, the moon's made inside out. Then you look at the detailed article written by two Soviet scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, as long ago as 1970, who looked at the long list of anomalies about the moon that make no sense whatsoever and cannot be explained by the fact that it's a natural body. And they concluded that it was some kind of gigantic craft, and everything was going on inside. Now, I mean, think of the Death Star, although their description came before the Death Star in Star Trek, but similar concept. And this man, William Tompkins, who claims to have worked for a US naval think tank directly responsible for extraterrestrial interaction, specifically mentions the moon in his information and in his book, where he says it's actually a command center for the extraterrestrial race that takes a reptilian form that is actually behind manipulating human society. And for me, from my research, the moon is firing an information source at us, which is affecting our perception and is affecting our behavior. There was a long and detailed article in a magazine called Nexus, comes out of Australia and talks about out-of-the-box stuff, by a whistleblower some years ago, 2011, after I've been writing about all this stuff, who said that there was what he called a mini CERN in Africa. And from 1995, for 5 years, they managed to have communication with an entity in another dimension. And the project, they said, was called the Charney Project, which plays out as computer interface. And I was reading this article just because I was interested in the subject. I didn't know where it was going. And first of all, the entity is quoted as saying through this computer interface that humans are controlled by a reptilian race that is expert in technology. What was that line? Their God is their technology. Think transhumanism. And I read on, and then starts talking about the moon, which I've always been writing about by then. At how if the moon wasn't there, then first of all, the Earth would be much calmer, not just in terms of weather and wind and severity of storms, but calmer emotionally. That humans were being manipulated into states of anxiety, for instance, via what was coming from the moon. States of anxiety equal the energetic frequency that this force feeds off. Then you look at, again, the ancient cultures. What do they say about the moon? The Zulus describe the moon as an egg, because they say the yolk has been taken out, which kind of relates to what that scientist said about the moon's inside out. What's on the surface should be inside. Because what these Soviet scientists were saying was that in their view, and this would answer many of the anomalies of what's on the surface, that this moon planetoid, as they call it, was hollowed out. And these ancient cultures also talk about the fact that the moon's not always been there, that it was brought there. In terms of the Zulus, they say it was brought there by the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent, and that the Chitahuri still live in the moon. This relates to William Tompkins and his reptilian command center being the moon. And so when you put it all together, there are many correlations of the fact that the moon's not what it appears to be, a natural body. The other thing is that there was a BBC documentary some years ago which was entitled "Do We Really Need the Moon?" And it concluded, rightly it seems, that if the moon was just a little bit further out or just a little bit closer, life on Earth would be very different. And then you look at the chances of the moon being so perfectly placed that when viewed from the Earth at the time of an eclipse, it is the same size as the sun. What's the chances of that? Well, the chances of so many of these anomalies being accidental. And they have no idea where it came from. They had a go once when they said that the moon was probably created when a Mars-type planet hit the Earth while the Earth was forming, and a lot of the Earth went off and became the moon. When the physics of that didn't work out, they went for the double whammy story, that this Mars-type planet hit the moon, went away, then come back and had another go, and became the moon. Except that the moon and the Earth are so different, the story's ludicrous. If you take the moon to be artificial part construct and to be the kind of thing that I'm talking about, the anomalies start to disperse and start to be answered, as these scientists did in 1970. But of course, they used the term that people immediately react against. They said they believed the moon was some kind of gigantic spaceship. And of course, no, we're back to the postage stamp normal. That's so far out of the box that most people will just reject it with a laugh. But the more and more that people know about the moon, the more this is starting to be the way that people are going, because as a natural body, none of it makes sense.
Kad smo već došli toliko daleko da razmišljamo kako je mjesec umjetno tijelo postavljeno da nas kontrolira, nema nikakvog razloga da razmišljamo da priča ovdje i završava. U vašoj zadnjoj knjizi općenito već neko vrijeme dosta vremena posvećujete Saturnu. Kroz mitologiju, kroz simboliku, ali također i kroz fotografije nase i kroz nekakvu, rekao bih, fizikalnu dinamiku vezanu uz njegove prstenove i slično. Što vas je dovelo do razmišljanja o Saturnu i kakav je bio njegov utjecaj i mjesto u današnjoj situaciji ili u prošlosti, s obzirom da sad već pričamo o jednoj, rekao bih, priči kozmičkih razmjera?
Well, let's look at what planets are and what can be done to manipulate our reality. We live in a simulation. So when you look at the heavens, see it for a moment as an electrical communication system. There is now a whole area of research in science outside of the mainstream, but mainstream is now having to be pulled in more and more because of what they're finding, which is called the electric universe. And this details, quite rightly, that this reality, certainly on one level, is about electromagnetism and electricity. This is the level that Tesla was talking about. When he said that you can have free energy technology to give people all the warmth and power you need without fossil fuels, this is what he was talking about. This is why he said, if you want to understand the universe, you've got to understand frequency and vibration. He's talking about this level. How do computers communicate? Electrically. How does the brain communicate? Electrically. How does the genetic structure in general communicate? Electrically. So we are interacting with what I call the cosmic internet, or this quantum computer Wi-Fi field that I call the simulation, electrically and electromagnetically on one level. Now, anything that can interfere with that electrical communication can interfere with our perceptions. It can be hacked into, it can be changed. And I say the moon is doing that, and also that Saturn, and for another day, the constellation of Orion is involved in this. And what's interesting is when you pick up these different aspects of this manipulation of the communication system via heavenly bodies, they just turn out to be the heavenly bodies that the ancients used to worship and focus upon and perceive their gods came from. So anyway, if you read a fantastic book by a man called David Tolbert, who was actually involved in the electric universe research. He wrote a book years ago called The Saturn Myth. And what he did, it must have taken him a long time of research. He went around the ancient cultures all over the world and just documented what they said about Saturn. And the correlation was remarkable, and the symbols that they used, which are still being used today all around us, though most people don't realize they're actually symbols of Saturn. And they told a common story that not millions of years ago, far, far, far more recently than that, Saturn was actually the main sun when viewed from Earth. And that the Earth had a two-sun system, a twin-sun system. Saturn, which is a sun, not a planet, and the sun we see today. And that when you looked from the Earth to Saturn, you looked through Mars and Venus. They went round as in one line. And this answers the question of why ancient cultures were so obsessed with Saturn. Why was Saturn the prime god of Rome? If Saturn was then, or when the myths started, where it is now, why would anyone focus on it from Earth? But if you realize that actually it was the dominant body in the Earth's sky, then you can see why Saturn is called the god of 1,000 names, because of all the names around the world given to Saturn. Of course it would be the focus, because it was the thing you could see. The ancients described this, and then they describe how fantastic upheavals happened in the solar system that changed the nature of the, shall we say, planetary layout. And this is all to be found in the geological and biological record of the Earth. These are the myths of the end of Atlantis and the end of Lemuria or Mu and such like. And people like Immanuel Velikovsky, as far back as the 1950s, was writing a series of books about the evidence for catastrophic changes in the solar system involving Saturn and others that almost destroyed the Earth. I mean, there's endless books about this. There's one I read, I remember, called When the Earth Nearly Died. And again, when you look around the ancient cultures and the myths and legends and accounts, they all describe this. I mean, you know, one aspect, one blatant aspect of it is the biblical Great Flood, when the you know, well, what happened. And after this upheaval, Saturn was where it is now, and we had the layout that we have now in the heavens. Now, there is no descriptions whatsoever in any of the ancient accounts of Saturn as an Earth sun that describe rings. None. It was the sun. They don't describe rings at all. And then that brings us to the work of Norman Bergrun, now in his 90s, who has a long history in technology, space technology, and other high technology, going back decades and decades and decades. And he was a guy who saw the world as scientists see the world, saw Saturn as people see Saturn. And then he started looking at photographs, first of all coming from the Voyager craft to Saturn in the 1980s, the early 1980s. And he looked at the pictures. And he realized that the rings were changing in a few minutes when they were supposed to be, according to the official story, there and static, and that's how they always have been. Even more so in early, what would it be, 2004, when the Cassini craft went to Saturn, and it's still there, apparently they're going to ditch it this year, started bringing photographs back. And he realized something very strange was going on. Not least because not only was he seeing the rings change when they shouldn't, and there are mainstream stories now about the rings changing, what's going on, we don't understand it, but he also saw enormous craft. And don't take his word for it, the pictures exist. The pictures exist, they're in my books, they're in his books. He wrote a book called Ringmakers of Saturn, detailing all the evidence that he had with the pictures. And these are pictures of, not the odd one, lots of them, of enormous, he doesn't call them spacecraft, he calls them electromagnetic vehicles, several times the size of the Earth. And if you put the Earth next to Saturn, you'll realize that our version of size and Saturn's version of size are not the same. not only were they all around Saturn, they were going in the rings, and when they got in the rings, they were spewing out vast amounts of what he called exhaust that were making the rings. What they've also found, and they're still being made, they're still changing. What they also found as a result of these probes to Saturn is that at the Saturn North Pole, they have a vast hexagon storm, big enough to encompass 4 Earths, and it's permanent. At the bottom of Saturn, at the southern pole, they have an eye storm, looks like an eye, which from when they first saw it to now is still there. And there was a story in a British newspaper only a few months ago that over the last 4 years, this hexagon storm has changed from blue to gold over 4 years. They have no idea why. Then you realize that the hexagon storm, a cycle of it, happens in exact correlation with the cycle of radio wave signals coming from Saturn. It has its own frequency, its own signature, its own frequency signature. And then I got sent, and you can hear it, you know, it's been recorded, you can hear the sounds coming off Saturn. And then I got sent this picture of a Saturn ring by a professional sound engineer who said, I see that every day in my work, that sound. And when I put it all together with lots of other information, for me, what Saturn is a fantastic broadcasting system, which we are decoding, and which the moon is amplifying. And in 1979, they found another enormous ring around Saturn, from 3.7 to 7.4 million miles away from Saturn. And this ring is big enough to encompass 1 billion Earths. And these are only the rings that we see, not the rings of sound that we don't see. Rings of information that we don't see, which we are decoding into this fake reality that the Gnostics talked about, and the fake reality, the simulation that more and more mainstream scientists are talking about. It's basically like hacking in to a computer system and changing the nature of the information that the target population are decoding into a reality. And what's been happening is the reality is getting smaller. So you start out with a simulation. Then you have the if you like, the hack of the simulation, which puts people in a smaller reality within the simulation. And now through transhumanism, they want to put us in a reality which only connects us technologically to a AI cloud and an even smaller simulation. And what I'm saying, and what some scientists are saying, is that this universe is a quantum computer, which they're now building in places around the world, quantum computers. And a quantum computer is a computer that has its information embedded in the energetic fabric of the computer. Two organizations that are driving transhumanism are Google, and now its parent company Alphabet, to hide the extent of Google and its activities, and DARPA. DARPA is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. And DARPA and Google, in terms of its technological development of robotics and transhumanist technology, are working together. And they, along with others in the internet giant field, are dominating the development and funding of what they call the D-Wave quantum computer. And I mentioned earlier about this archontic force being described by the Gnostics as being expert in counter mimicry, basically mimicking something that already exists. And the transhumanist connect humans to the cloud quantum computer, because that's what it's designed to be controlled by eventually, is counter mimicking the wider simulation that we have been experiencing up to this point, but squeezing even more our perceptual range into an even smaller range of perception. In other words, if you could symbolize it as being entrapped in a box, then entrapped in a smaller box, then entrapped in a tiny box. And with every new reduction of the, quote, box, we become more and more detached from the expanded state of awareness that is our natural state.
Prepustit ćemo čitateljima da otkriju druge poveznice Saturna sa mitologijom. On se često prikazuje i kao šesterokraka zvijezda i kao kocka i tako dalje. No previše tu podataka, no jedan podatak vezan uz Saturna, to je ovaj šestostrani oblik, nas vodi u područje koje ste također dotaknuli u knjizi, koje je očigledno vezano uz prirodu stvarnosti i prirodu manipulacija, a to su fraktali. Koja su najnovija otkrića vezano uz fraktale i na koji način nas oni dovode zapravo u vezu sa onime što mi doživljavamo kao stvarnost?
Well, the thing is that it's been seen for a long time that within nature, within our reality, there are constantly recurring mathematical sequences. There is the Fibonacci sequence, where you add the previous numbers to get the next one. 1 and 1, 2, 2 and 1, 3, 3 and 2, 5. That sequence is found throughout nature. You've got the pi sequences, golden mean, etc. And you have fractals, which are basically a form of holographic reality, where the smaller is a smaller version of the bigger, which is what you find with holograms. And we live in a holographic simulation, and therefore you're going to find holographic mathematics. And holographic mathematics are found constantly in the fabric of our reality. These various scientific studies, like at the University of Bonn in Germany and Gates in America, a scientific advisor to Barack Obama during his presidency, have both found mathematical sequences and codes which relate to it being a simulation. I mean, Gates was asked once, have you found in the fabric of our reality codes that are the same as you find in search engines, etc., in computers? And his answer was yes, the same. And so this mathematical, geometrical, recurring series of sequences in our reality has been a mystery up to this point. Why is it there? Why everything from the way a shell spirals to the form of it, the proportions of a human face, why do they break down to the same basic mathematical and recurring geometrical mathematical sequences? I would strongly suggest that it's because they're computer codes. You know, if you look in a computer, and if you look in you know, internet technology, you're going to find the same recurring codes, the same encoded sequences that they work on. So if we do live in a simulation, you would absolutely expect that there would be constantly recurring mathematical and geometrical sequences, exactly what we have. The Gnostics describe how this archontic force, in their terms, took a bad copy of the original universe, and that's the fake reality that we're experiencing. Now, of course, in their language, they can't describe a simulation because they haven't come across that. They haven't got that language. So they talk about a bad copy. bad copy, a simulation of something that existed before, but a bad copy. You imagine something like you've got a website and you download a copy of the website. This is why people describing the Gnostic documents talk about the fact that they downloaded the fractal patterns of the universe. This archontic force downloaded the fractal patterns of the universe. You take a copy of it. The original still exists, but now you've got a copy and you've got control of that copy. So now you can change it as you want. You're not changing the original now, you've got the copy and changing the copy. And the copy would have been a bad copy of the original, which is described in extraordinarily beautiful terms. And over this period, this bad copy has been changed and changed and changed and changed and changed to fit the desires, demands, and atmospheric needs of this force and the way that it takes form. So if you look at one of the energetic sources of this this archontic force, it is radiation. I mean, the whole of this reality is based on radiation. That's what the electromagnetic spectrum is. And if you go back only to the 1950s, the increase in technological radiation in our atmosphere and the atmosphere, the fields of energy that we interact with every day, is absolutely shocking and catastrophic. There's a guy in Canada, a scientist who specialized in researching this, and he's described it as basically an experiment with human existence, because this radiation increase is now overlapping the human electrical field, the central nervous system, and that's part of this technological takeover. And so then you know, people say, and they ask the question, and it's an understandable question, why would this network of family bloodlines that represent this archontic force in human reality, what we call the elite in its various names, why would it destroy the planet it lives on? Why would it be devastating the environment? Why would it be building up this, for humans, catastrophic level of atmospheric radiation? Well, how about that that's what they need to exist in, and they're changing the human world to become their world? This is what I suggest is happening. And as humans mutate as a result of this radiation vast increase, some will mutate into a form that will be able to handle that increased radiation, and many others won't. And the ones that do, they'll be the ones left behind, where the ones that don't fuse into this increased radiation field, they'll be gone. And they're basically telling you that. What they're saying is, unless you fuse with this technological reality, then the humans that don't do it will just die out. They're telling you. Okay. So this is where we're at, and you know, think of what we've been talking about in these two chats we've had, and then imagine turning on the television news and being told what you need to know about the world every day. Look at the difference between what's on that news bulletin and what we've been talking about.
I za kraj, ako stane u par minuta, naravno ono što ljude najviše zanima, rješenje. Da bi čovjek detektirao rješenje, mora imati prvo pravu analizu problema za koje treba rješenje. Stoga, kako zapravo nadvladati transhumanističku tehnologiju i sve ono što nas zapravo vodi u tehnološki kavez i kavez svijesti kojeg ste opisivali u ove dvije emisije?
Well, there's two levels. One is the five sense level, and that's recognizing that this technological explosion is leading somewhere, and it's not happening by organic unfolding randomly. It's happening for a reason. And that reason is becoming more and more blatantly obvious. But, you see, if this is a projection, and the whole basis of human control is control of perception, and holding people in a narrow band of frequency, which you might call five-sense reality, then the solution, or removing the cause of the problem, is obvious. It's not stockpiling weapons, and it's not, you know, going to war with the enemy. It's changing our frequency. Because everything is frequency. And if you are in a certain state of perception, you are operating in a certain frequency. And the more limited terms you see yourself in, the lower the frequency. I mean, as Einstein said, you get the frequency you want, you get what that frequency represents. As he said, that's not philosophy, that's physics. So if you're operating on a certain frequency, which is what five-sense perception puts you in, then you're in the prison, you're in the mind prison. If you identify with, you know, I'm Ethel down the store, I have no power, that represents itself as a frequency, and a very low frequency. And a very low frequency can only access a very low frequency of what? Information, insight, understanding. Once we reevaluate our sense of self-identity, and we start to see ourselves not as Ethel down the store, but as infinite awareness having an experience in a reality, our self-identity is no longer Ethel. That's just a label. It's just an experience. Our self-identity is infinite awareness, having the experience. We've moved our point of attention. And as you move your point of attention and you expand your sense of self into the realms of I am pure consciousness, and potentially I am all consciousness, because as I put it, we are a point of attention with an infinite awareness. But that point of attention can be Ethel or it can be infinite awareness. Just a choice of how much of this awareness we self-identify with. And therefore, when you re-evaluate your sense of identity to that, your frequency massively increases. And you start to tap in to levels of awareness, levels of insight, and levels of potential to change that operate well beyond this world, this prison. And then everything changes. And this is why when people go through this, and I've met them all over the world that've been through it, I've been through it, I went through it 30 years ago nearly. They say, it's so obvious now, why couldn't I see it before? Because you were there then. And now you're there. Now you're seeing the forest, you were seeing the twigs before. And everything comes from that. It's like Einstein said again, you cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. But that's what we're trying to do all the time. So politics, look at politics. Politics is the same level of consciousness called Party A, creating problems, and then the same level of consciousness comes in called Party B to try to do something about the problems before, and they create more problems. Why? Because they're the same level of consciousness that created them. They might be called different names, but it's the same thing. If we are going to get out of this, we need to move to another level of consciousness, and we're only going to do that by self-identifying with a different perception of the I. From being little me, and I'm all my labels, to being I am beyond all labels. I am awareness and capable of creating anything. There is no limitation at that point, whereas there is constant limitation when we self-identify with phantom self, five-sense self. You know, we're not going to be able to change anything unless we change ourselves and change our level of consciousness. Anyone that tells you otherwise is kidding you and kidding themselves.
Davide, hvala vam puno za vaše vrijeme i do neke